Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Ridgley. As introduced, I'm a key account manager with IntegrityNext. We are living in a complex world. This world is not getting less complex. It's going in the other direction, right? Due to increasing due diligence obligations, net zero commitments, risks within the supply chain in general. Therefore, it's very important that procurement is a part of the solution. Not only building a more sustainable business, but also a more sustainable economy. So, what does IntegrityNext do? IntegrityNext is a company that we are a SaaS solution, so we live in the cloud, but better said, we're content as a service. So we aim to monitor 100% of your supply base across the top 26 ESG topics at the moment. We have standardized our solutions, standardized our questionnaires, therefore a supplier can answer one time and share many times with customers. By standardizing our approach to the market, making it free for suppliers to use, offering support for suppliers, we have built the largest supplier sustainability network in the world. We have more than 1 million suppliers in our network at the moment, and we're increasing at a rate of around 10,000 new suppliers per week at the moment. Our customer, Siemens Gamesa, is ahead of the curve, and I'm proud and happy to present Maximilian here to walk through Siemens Gamesa's journey into a more sustainable future.
Thank you, Jared. Yeah, I'm really delighted today to share a little bit more insights on our journey to a sustainable supply chain. And it was around 2 years ago, roughly, when investors, customers, and many other stakeholders started to reach out on this topic, asking us, guys, how are you performing your due diligence? We would like to learn more about your supply chain network. So I happily replied here that we have a supplier network of more than 20,000 suppliers with a spend of roughly 8 billion euro. Secretly, I hoped that would scare them off a little, but it didn't. Instead, they were asking further about the amount of products that we are using for our wind turbines. So again, I happily replied that we are using more than 5,000 different products for our wind turbines, which led to the question about the raw materials that we are using for our wind turbines. And you know me by now, so again, I happily replied that we use steel, copper, aluminum, epoxy, fibers, rare earths, and some other minor quantities of other materials. And then they asked, how do you manage your due diligence in this complex environment? And I did the only reasonable thing. But today I'm back, and I made up my mind, and I would like to share with you our approach to due diligence. And basically, there are two key messages that I would like to share with you today. Number one, when performing a due diligence, you always need to differentiate between supplier and material level. And number two, increasing transparency, sustainability, and resilience takes no less than a revolution. Now let's take a few more minutes to put some more meat on the bone here. So, if we need to differentiate between the supplier and the material level, and of course also I know that these two areas are closely related because suppliers are delivering the materials, but on the supplier level we are aiming to assess the sustainability performance of our suppliers. Here we are aiming to go very broad to at the end be able to slice and dice our supply base based on their sustainability performance. While on the material level, we are aiming to increase transparency on supply chain networks. So going beyond our tier 1 suppliers and identify further suppliers that we need to monitor, that we need to assess. And we have developed management frameworks to guide our activities here. Let's now start with the supplier level and our ESG risk and performance management framework. What it is about, how we are managing it, and how we are measuring it. Of course, we were coming already out of an existing framework here. This framework was traditionally centered around risk management. And in traditional risk-based frameworks, you are usually aiming to identify high-risk suppliers with regards to environmental or social performance. And then you better manage these high-risk suppliers carefully to avoid that any potential adverse impacts are related to your activities. And this is important because risks will always be out there, but we need to make sure that they are managed appropriately. While next to that, we have introduced a performance-based framework. So identify high-impact suppliers with regards to our innovativeness, with regards to our footprints. And with these suppliers, we want to work closely together to drive our own sustainability performance in terms of aligned targets, roadmaps, innovation, and continuous improvements. Here we are talking about topics that go beyond pure compliance with legal requirements, but about topics that really provide impact for societies, like decarbonization, improved resource intensities, or improvements of human rights. Our ESG risk and performance-based performance management framework is integrated across our procurement processes, starting from the supplier onboarding over to supplier development, and it's also a part of our supplier selection criteria. Let's take now a closer look at the heart of our ESG risk and performance management framework. We have defined a supplier journey. The supplier journey sets out the due diligence requirements that we set for our suppliers. And it all starts with our supplier segmentation, and that's the same like for many other companies, where we ultimately are aiming to segment our supply base. And here we are doing it based on impact, strategic relevance. Greetings from Kraljic, I think we all know it, so that you have strategic suppliers, which is at the end low amount of suppliers with high impacts, down to the tier suppliers, where we then have high amount of suppliers with rather low impacts. Now, for all of our suppliers, we are requiring them to sign our code of conduct. That's the basic foundation for doing business together. And believe me, I have heard any possible excuse why someone cannot sign a code of conduct, but we need to be strict here, because it's simply super suspicious if a supplier cannot sign your child labor policy or whatsoever. Thereafter, we are conducting a risk screening based on country and industry risks. This will give us a first good glance on the inherent ESG risks related to our goods and services that we are buying. And based on that, we have defined 3 assessment modules that we are utilizing to make sure risks are managed appropriately and our code of conduct is integrated appropriately. As you can see here, our core and pool suppliers, they will be assessed via IntegrityNext self-assessment questionnaire. Self-assessment questionnaires are really helpful in order to build broad transparency across a broad range of suppliers in terms of governance mechanisms in place, targets in place, or certificates in place. While our strategic suppliers, they are assessed by EcoVadis for a sustainability deep dive assessment to gain more insights on our suppliers' sustainability performance. And for suppliers with very high risks, they will be assessed via on-site audits, as indicated by the last step here. At the end of this process, we are consolidating all the different supplier journeys then into one final result, whether a supplier is a responsible business or not. And we are utilizing this information to derive now KPIs based on that. And we are utilizing coverage-based KPIs as well as performance-based KPIs. Coverage-based KPIs, they are focusing on the amount of suppliers that have been engaged with or the amount of suppliers that have been assessed. So here we are really looking about internally also incentivizing our teams to increase coverage. Like 80% of the suppliers in my portfolio have been engaged, 70 of the suppliers in my commodity have been assessed. While performance-based, we are looking at the outcomes of these assessments. Here we are looking at the IntegrityNext traffic lights, at the EcoVadis scores, at the audit scores, and we are putting this together again to internally incentivize our teams, kind of commodity overall performance, as well as externally incentivize our suppliers to improve their sustainability performance. Consolidating all of this information into meaningful due diligence KPIs at the end will boost your sustainability performance because you are making sustainability a transparent decision factor. But it will take quite some efforts in order to make sure that you are able to consolidate the different information and that you are also able then to use them. Now, we talked a little about the supplier level due diligence. Let's also take a look at the material level due diligence. What it is about, how we are performing it, how we are measuring it. Our wind turbines, they consist of many different raw materials. And some of these raw materials could be related to severe sustainability issues, such as illegal mining, child labor, forced labor, or environmental pollution. On average, across all industries, 1 in 10 children is in child labor. About 20 million people are victims of forced labor, and more than 6,000 workers die every day due to poor working conditions. So we all need to get our shit together here to bring these numbers down. And therefore, we need to go deep along high-risk supply chains. And I'm not saying that this is easy, but an area with good practical experience here can be found in the responsible sourcing of conflict minerals as per the OECD guidance. Here, processes have quite well developed for the 3TGs to build transparency along also the lower tiers within your supply chain. And we are utilizing now these processes to also go further for other raw materials. So we were taking a look at our wind turbines, and we identified that copper, rare earth, aluminum, steel are high-risk supply chains where we need to go further. And for these supply chains, we are aiming to clarify the chain of custody. So at the end, map out the whole supply chain network and the lower tiers involved, down to the mine from where we are sourcing our raw materials from. So that at the end, we have a good overview about the supply chain network and the suppliers involved, and we can select suppliers from this network and put them again through our supplier journey. Now let's take a closer look at the key step in here, clarifying the chain of custody. To clarify the chain of custody, we are closely engaging with our tier 1 suppliers. And let me make this really practical for you. We buy for our wind turbines magnets. They contain rare earths. So we are starting to identify our tier 1 suppliers, the magnet suppliers. Thereafter, we are modeling how the supply chain looks like. It can be the different tiers that then involve mining, separation, refining, smelters, or producers at the end. When we have mapped out this, we are revising our supplier engagement survey and send it to our suppliers. And the survey is basically asking for the names and locations of the different tiers. So that at the end, all of this information is then consolidated in one big database that we can utilize to map out our supply chain. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, In reality, this keeps me up quite a lot. There are suppliers out that are not willing to disclose information, suppliers that don't have these informations, and there's this massive amount of data that we need to obtain and manage. Nevertheless, we started this year to do it for copper and rare earth, and it was quite successful, I must say. Here, we were now able to also start measuring different things on the supply chain. And we started very descriptive here, looking at the amount of suppliers that have been responding, so that we come up to a kind of transparency score. While thereafter, we were looking at the supply chain. How many suppliers do we see in total at the network? How many suppliers do we see along the different tiers? How many shared relationships can we find between the suppliers? And ultimately, from which mines are our products originating from? Well, performance-wise, we are now working closely together with our Tier 1 suppliers to identify further suppliers that we want to put through our supplier journey. And digitalization is urgently needed to help this process here, to connect the dots and enable us to take actions. Now, if you remember my first key message, then I hope you could see why it is so important to differentiate between the supplier and the material level. Because only by differentiating between the supplier and material level, we will be able to drive sustainability performance on the supplier level. Only by differentiating between the supplier and material level, we will be able to increase transparency on supply chain networks. And only by differentiating between these two perspectives, we will be able to take responsibility from end to end. And perhaps you also remember my second key message. Increasing transparency, sustainability, and resilience takes no less than a revolution. A revolution of our processes to make sure that the due diligence requirements are reflected in our supplier management approach. A revolution of our systems to make sure that we are able to manage the data around it. And a revolution of the way how we work together across supply chains. Join us and be a part of this revolution. Back to you, Jared.
Maximilian, thank you so much. Great presentation. Love the story, love the message. I have a few questions for you. So you showed a slide that had your process on there, and it includes multiple ESG solutions. What made you select IntegrityNext, and what benefits do you see IntegrityNext that you didn't have before?
Very good, yeah. Yeah, being also a good member of the procurement department, we of course conducted an RFP to find a good service provider supporting us along this process. And we were coming out of a situation where we had our own tool in place supporting us in self-assessing our suppliers. But we also noticed that back in the days when we started with this, there were no services available on the market simply. So we needed to do something. But over the course of the last 2 years, let's say, we could see that very well-equipped service providers have developed now, supporting the automation, digitization of these processes. And the requirements that we see from regulators, customers, and the like were increasing. So it was very difficult for us to keep pace on managing our own tools and services around it, but instead decided to partner now with someone who is capable of supporting us in all the specificities needed now around this process.
Excellent, thank you. And after the selection, getting IntegrityNext implemented, what was that like for you? How long did it take? How difficult was it?
Very good, yes. I mean, working in procurement, one of the big problems we always have is data, right? Our data is usually not as good as we wish it to be. So there's a lot of data crunching at the beginning where we need to try to find how can we compile all the data sources together so that we have a good supplier database that we can utilize to work with our service providers now together. And that was really the first step for us, to manage and work around our own data. And then thereafter, we were starting now with the first campaign and rolled IntegrityNext out for our direct material suppliers. Over the first 3 months, we've been able now to assess 400 million euro of spend, which is really a big success for us, given the short time frame here. To have a successful program, we started to manage this quite centrally to get things going, and now with more data and transparency handing over more and more responsibility to the commodity teams and enabling them to manage with the data that we now have and with the tools that we have in place.
Excellent, excellent. 400 million in spend in 3 months. Amazing. So the last question that I have for you is, we see an increase in customers, prospects asking us for category or product level sustainability monitoring. How do you see this taking place? How do you see technology supporting this in the future?
Yeah, if you remember this differentiation between the product or the supplier and the material level here, then if we see the product in there, we still face the difficulty that if a customer comes to us and asks us, where is this gearbox coming from that you have built into our wind turbine? Then we could find out, yeah, it's from this tier 1 supplier, and this tier 1 supplier uses this supply chain. So somewhere out of this network, this gearbox is coming. But it's still very difficult to product-related see the exact flow of this gearbox. So where have the raw materials been extracted? For specifically this gearbox, where have they been processed? Where has it been manufactured at the end? This will be a major challenge for many of us to take even more responsibility than we do already now. But digitalization will help us here in the future. We see promising technologies like blockchain developing to support also the traceability and make sure that at the end, no violations of human rights, environmental issues are related then to our products. I would estimate this will take at least another 5 to 10 years to have really the digitalization and the tools available to support us along this process. But it will be heavily needed to take full product-related responsibility.
Excellent, excellent. Great answers. So, looks like we have 5 minutes left, 5 minutes unplanned. So, are there any questions that are out there in the audience?
Very good. Yeah. Not sure if everyone understood, but the question is about who is driving this initiative, also within the procurement organization. How is everything relating together? How do you manage it at the end together with the people? Huh? And I briefly shared that now at the beginning, we were driving this very centrally with my team together, so that we were approaching suppliers in the mass communication, followed up with suppliers to get them on board, get them assessed. And now we are basically in the second step here. We are now consolidating the information that we got out of this process into supplier profiles. So at the end, we will now sitting together with the different commodity teams and having a big database, dashboard and tables behind it where we can show those are your top 10 suppliers. How many of them have been engaged? How many have been gone through an assessment? How is their performance? And this is now the step for us to be on the table together with the commodity management teams, handing over some tasks to them, and for key suppliers working together with them now, engaging with them. So that's like really the fun part, really, that is starting now to manage also the suppliers out of this.
I've got a question here on Slido. If it was the same question that was just asked, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that first one. It was the same question. Okay, then if you want to get a couple more in here, then we have time for them.
Time for one more.
One more. Shout it out. Yeah.
I have a question about the commodities. So you're mentioning about copper, which is also purchased by our company. We find it very difficult to go throughout the supply chain, and because copper is a commodity, and therefore you have one general price. How do you then measure the impact on CO2 per copper mine? And how do you more or less differentiate? Is it also that you can say, okay, this mine we exclude from purchasing?
Very good, yeah. The honest answer here is it's quite difficult, right? It was relatively easy, surprisingly, for rare earth supply chains because they are not so complex and not so diverse spread out across the world. For copper, we also faced with many of our suppliers more challenges here because it's also an exercise they are conducting now for the first time. And for us, when we talk about decarbonization and CO2, then we follow an approach where we identified key products within our wind turbine, which is about 20 products out of those 5,000 products that come with big impacts and that explain most of our wind turbine's footprint. And for these supply chains, we work then closely together with our direct suppliers again to ensure how can we decarbonize these supply chains together. And for copper, we are not yet at the mine level. For steel, we are at the steelmaker level, who have quite good transparency already. But for copper, this is an area still progressing for us, where we need still to put in some work together with our partners.
If you'd like to maybe wind it up, we can end it there. Or have we wound it up and I'll take it from here. Ladies and gentlemen, applause for the panel, the conversation, the people. Here we go.